Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you're watching this. This is Left Side of the Aisle. I'm Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, I'm going to be ranting away at you at things that I think are important enough for you to be aware of and maybe even do something about. As always, comments, questions, reactions, whatever to the show can be sent to me directly at my personal email, which is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here somewhere a couple of times during the show. You can go there, you can get the email address there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. Just do be aware, if you send me email, to please include something in the subject line making clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm lousy about answering email. All right, with that, before we do anything else, I've got two things to cover. One is that last week, I told you about this wheelchair that could climb stairs, and I was kind of excited about it. I still am. But due to my thoroughgoing complete incompetence, I didn't include a picture of it. So this is a picture of that wheelchair. And again, you can see those tooth rubber grips on the bottom that enable it to grip on the stairs and climb. The other thing is, again, through my total incompetence, I discovered that finding a high school graduation card at the very last moment borders on the impossible. So, Jason, this is for you. All right. With that, let's get on with it. I'm going to start, as I like to, with some good news. This is really just kind of a bit of good news. You'll see why, but it is good. Because one good thing that the O crowd has done, and there are few enough such things that we should celebrate the ones that we have. One of the good things they've done is to issue proposed rules regarding greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. Greenhouse gases being the kinds that affect and worsen global warming. Now, because they are the worst in this regard, the primary targets of these rules will wind up being coal-fired power plants. If enacted, these rules, in fact, could potentially close down hundreds of such plants because they simply can't meet the tightened standards. It could put almost a freeze on the construction of new coal-fired plants and so slow the demand for coal production in the United States. And of course, we can't have that, can we? So a collection of the nation's largest coal companies, along with 14 coal-producing states, sued in federal court to block the new rules. Unfortunately for them, the rules were still in draft form, with the final rules expected in August. So a three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled unanimously to throw out the suit, saying it was unprecedented for a court to be asked to make a judgment about a rule that was still in draft form. Now, interestingly, among the lawyers representing the coal companies here was Lawrence Tribe, who's regarded as a scholar of constitutional law, and you'd think he would have known that this sort of suit was, in fact, unprecedented and going to get thrown out, but I guess when the paycheck is big enough, you just do whatever the client wants. Now, the reason this is just a bit of good news is that undoubtedly the suit will rise from its tomb once the final rules are issued, and is likely to be just the first in a wave of such suits challenging the EPA's climate change rules. Because after all, the one thing we cannot do about climate change is anything that affects corporate America. Still, this ruling at least shows that courts may, I emphasize may, but the courts may refuse to be patsies for the polluters. And I guess we have to take our good news wherever we can find it. Next up, we have some other good news. On June 14th, in May of 2014, Pulaski County, Arkansas Judge Chris Piazza struck down that state's law barring same-sex marriage. About a week later, the state Supreme Court issued a stay of that order, pending appeal, but in that time, more than 500 same-sex couples had gotten marriage licenses. State officials have been refusing to recognize those marriages, saying that they are void from inception. The good news here is that on June 9th, Pulaski County Circuit Judge Wendell Griffin ordered Arkansas officials to recognize those marriages, saying the state's failure to do so demonstrated, quote, shameless disrespect for fundamental fairness and equality. The ruling will enable these couples to enjoy a host of benefits reserved for married couples, including being able to file taxes jointly. They can appear jointly on a child's birth certificate. They can enroll together in state insurance plans. They can even file for divorce. Meanwhile, the Arkansas State Supreme Court has not yet said when it will make a ruling on the same-sex marriage case, but the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to issue its ruling on the case before it sometime this month. Now, one other bit of good news, and this is a kind of a little bit of an odd one, but I enjoy it because it means the future maybe is not completely as bleak as I sometimes imagine, and I suppose that we as a species are in fact making progress in some ways. On June 7th, Bangkok University's School of Fine and Applied Arts in Bangkok, Thailand, put up several Facebook pages reminding students of the do's and don'ts of the school's dress code. For both girls and boys, sloppy shirts, untucked tails, undone ties, floppy blouses, and flip-flops are all don'ts. Now, yes, I don't either see what's wrong with flip-flops and untucked shirts, but that's not the point here. The point is that the school also offered guidelines for what they called tomboys and ladyboys, adding that it's up to the students to decide how they will dress. And basically it seems that as long as you tuck in your doggone shirt, you'll be okay. Bangkok University thus becomes the first educational institute in Thailand to allow students to dress according to their gender identity. This follows the announcement in January that a new constitution will include the term third gender in order to provide legal protection for homosexual, transsexual, and transgender people in the Thai community. Unhappily, this new constitution arises as the result of a military coup last year that occurred after some months of protests and fighting that had left like 30 people dead. But frankly, right now, don't harsh my buzz. Just let me enjoy the sense of social progress that is being hinted at here. All right, now we go over to some not good news. And I'm going to start with this by quoting the opening of a news article. Quoting again, advocates on both sides of the abortion debate said Tuesday that they are stunned police arrested a Georgia woman on murder charges after a hospital worker told officers she terminated her pregnancy by taking abortion pills. The woman involved is 23-year-old Kenalissa Jones, and this is what happened. On June 6, a county social services worker called police to a hospital in Albany, Georgia, where a hospital social worker said that Jones had said that she had taken 4 pills she had purchased on the internet to induce labor because she and her boyfriend had broken up. She did go into labor. She was on her way to the hospital in her car when the fetus was delivered. It did not survive. Police arrested Jones on charges of malice, murder, and possession of a dangerous drug. Now, the thing here is all this seems to be in conflict with Georgia law because state law explicitly bars prosecuting women for feticide involving their own pregnancies. And back in 1998, a Georgia appeals court ruled that a teenager whose fetus was stillborn after she shot herself in the abdomen could not be prosecuted for having performed an illegal abortion. In fact, even one anti-abortion group in the state, the Georgia Right to Life, expressed surprise over the arrest and said it was the first such case of which they knew. District Attorney Greg Edwards said that there are issues he is trying to unravel before deciding whether to pursue the case. Frankly, it seems to me that what you actually have here is a couple of cops having no idea what the law is, plus a local DA who is now trying to figure out the least embarrassing way out of this, which may be reflected by the fact that they decided now to drop the murder charges, but are still considering the misdemeanor charges of possessing a dangerous drug. I mean, the salient point here to me is that it also seems, besides thinking that it was just trying to find a way out of this, is that the cops were just prepared to assume that anything associated with abortion must be a crime. And besides, any woman who has an abortion, well, she's just a murderer, isn't she, right? So arrest her, charge her, punish her. I mean, that's where the malice was here, not with her, with the cops. On the other hand, in fairness, that was likely a visceral reaction on the part of the cops. You want to see real, considered malice, we have to go somewhere else. In fact, we have to go to what often seems to be the home base of considered malice, Texas. On June 9th, the reliably right-wing Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the main provisions of the extremist anti-choice law that Texas passed back in 2003, one designed to close down clinics where abortions are performed by creating costs and regulatory demands that the clinics simply cannot meet. The bill, for example, requires abortion clinics to meet standards for what are called ambulatory surgical centers. This involves minimum size for rooms, width of hallways, width of doorways. It involves ventilation systems, other structural and even aesthetic elements, as well as requiring them to have facilities for certain types of surgeries that they would simply not be performing. What's more, the doctors involved have to have admitting privileges at a hospital no more than 30 miles away. Now, the required physical modifications here are cost prohibitive for many of these clinics, and even if they could be made, the resulting additional expense to the operation would likely make the procedures themselves cost prohibitive for many of these clinics' clients. And what's more, many hospitals won't grant admitting privileges for abortion clinics, either because they are a Catholic hospital, or because they're afraid of backlash, or because the doctors are actually visiting doctors who don't have a close local residence, and hospitals say, we don't give admitting privileges to doctors whose practice is not centered here. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. All of this stuff is justified, if even that's a legitimate word to use in this case, it's justified in the law as protection of women's health. But all of it is, in fact, totally medically unnecessary. The American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which represents 90% of U.S. board-certified OBGYNs, declared the provision requiring clinics to meet the standards for ambulatory surgical centers was, quoting, plainly intended to restrict the reproductive rights of women in Texas through a series of requirements that improperly regulate medical practice and interfere with the patient-physician relationship. But that's irrelevant. That's pointless. Who cares about what the most knowledgeable people on the topic would say when we have God on our side? Now, the three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit did not invoke any deity, but it did wholly embrace the state's contention that this is actually all about women's health. Yes, sirree. The poor dears just need our protection so badly. We just have to make sure they're safe, and the best way to make abortions safe is to make them virtually impossible to get. You know, I've said a number of times here in this show that I am old enough to remember the symbolism of a wire coat hanger, and I have no desire to return to that time. Yet it seems that is exactly what we are doing as the back alley butchers sharpen their instruments and lick their lips. All right, from there to one of our occasional features. It's called Everything You Need to Know. This is where you can learn a great deal about something in a very short time. In this case, it's everything you need to know about the maldistribution of justice in this country in just 2 sentences. First, in a report filed just a week after Tamir Rice was killed by cops, police said the boy would have been charged with aggravated menacing and inducing panic. That is, if they hadn't shot him in less than 2 seconds after screeching up to him in the patrol car. 2, after a months-long investigation of this murder, the Cayuga County Sheriff's Office released the results of its investigation to the Cayuga County Prosecutor's Office, results which had no determination whatsoever of what sort of charges might be filed. And that is everything you need to know. All right, one last thing before we go to break. It's another little bit of news about our lovely little war. A war good for scaring the natives into submission to the national security gods, while striving to avoid any real cost or pain that might provoke resistance or resentment or even reflection on the wisdom of the course, as all of the actual cost and pain is reserved for unseen, unheard others. Our Nobel Peace Prize president has announced that another 450 U.S. troops are headed for Iraq, bringing the total there to over 3,500. These are going to be at a new training facility in Anbar province to support, supposedly, the Iraqi government's feeble and floundering efforts to retake the province from Daesh, otherwise known as ISIS. Oh, but don't worry. By the way, don't worry about this. It's just like all the rest that are already there, these will be trainers, they'll be advisors. No combat, no siree. Well, some of the 450 will be advisors. 50 of them, actually. The rest are there for logistical support and force protection. Not combat, mind you. Oh, no. Not fighting or shooting or anything like that. No. Force protection. And by the way, get comfortable. An Obama administration officials say it could take at least 3 to 5 years for Iraq to push out ISIS, which would make it roughly 6 to 8 years after the amazing Mr. O, according to his own people's claim, ended the Iraq War. One last thing for now, those 3,100 troops already in Iraq, before the 450, those 31 troops already in Iraq were supposed to represent a ceiling, a cap, on U.S. military involvement. And apparently the word cap means as much to this administration as transparent does. Which means, watch this space. And we're taking a break. And we're back. And we're back with one of our regular weekly features. It's the Clown Award, given for meritorious stupidity. This week, the Big Red Nose is going to someone you likely never heard of, but he still matters in this world. His name is John Hilsenrath, and he is the chief economics correspondent of the Wall Street Journal. At the Journal's blog on June 2nd, he wrote what he called a letter to stingy American consumers, wondering, in short, what's wrong with you? He whined that consumer spending didn't increase in April as compared to March, and actually groused that the level of savings was up. Now, you remember when the complaint was that we didn't save enough? And that was everything was wrong with the economies, that we didn't save enough? Now it's we save too much. He also says that we know you experienced a terrible shock when the economy collapsed in 2008 and all that followed from that. But quoting him, those shocks seem like a long time ago to us in a newsroom. In other words, aren't you over that yet? Did you know, this is quoting him, did you know the American economy is counting on you? Another quote, did you know the Federal Reserve is counting on you too? Now, we have an economy now where unemployment is still not back to where it was before the big collapse that was brought about by gross criminality driven by ego and blind greed, and where the number of involuntary part-time workers, these are people who are working part-time jobs only because they can't find full-time work, that the number of involuntary part-time workers is actually up and is expected to stay up because of corporate decisions about what's most profitable for them. We have an economy where there is nowhere in the country where you can afford a one-bedroom apartment working at minimum wage, even full-time year-round. And you cannot, there's no place in the country where you can afford a two-bedroom apartment unless you're making at least $14 an hour. And in fact, in 13 states, you have to be making at least $20 an hour. We have an economy where corporations are increasingly using temporary visas, known as H-1Bs, to replace American technology workers with foreign workers because they will work for 25 to 50% less than the Americans. And the CEO-led Partnership for a New American Economy, which is pushing for an overhaul of immigration laws, wants an increase in H-1B visas. We live in an economy where there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth over the fact that corporate profits dropped in the first quarter of 2015. Even though, as one commenter pointed out, that was only because of the beating the energy sector took because of the drop in oil prices. If you took energy out of the mix, corporate profits are actually up a very healthy 9.6% over the first quarter of 2014. What's more, even after that drop, corporate profits were still at a level that would have been a record any time in the 60 years before 2008. And by the way, 2008, to that point, was the record. We live in an economy where, despite those continuing high profits, the 2015 Business Roundtable CEO Economic Outlook Index says that U.S. CEOs are scaling back plans for expansion and hiring for the second half of 2015 by about 10%. We live in an economy where real median household income, that's real household purchasing power, is about 10% below what it was around 1999 and has continued to decline despite the end of the recession. In sum, we live in an economy where we are still struggling, where we are getting nowhere and have been that way for years on end. Corporations are raking it in, but refusing to use any of that pile of cash to hire or invest, but would rather lobby for a change in immigration laws that will allow them to pay people even less and increase their profits. And who is to blame for the sluggish economy? Why, according to the Wall Street Journal, we are. We're stingy, we're self-concerned, we're unwilling to recognize that the Federal Reserve is counting on us. So we need to go out and spend, go deeper into debt, struggle harder, longer, for lower wages, after which we can be the target of another lecture about how all our debt and our bankruptcies and our foreclosures are all our own fault. And to newsroom ensconced, isolated, overpaid twits like John Hilsenrath, this all makes perfect sense. John Hilsenrath and the rest of the bozos, pure, complete clowns. All right, I want to give you an update on something about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is this massive trade agreement that's being negotiated among 12 Pacific Rim nations, led largely by the United States, which has been done largely in secret. One of the things that happened is that in order to get this passed, Obama has been pushing for what's called Trade Promotion Authority. It's also known as Fast Track. This is basically only done for trade agreements. And the idea is that when the agreement is finalized, it's presented to Congress. You can vote it up or you can vote it down, but you can't change it. It is designed specifically to make it easier to get trade bills through Congress. Well, the Senate passed giving fast-track authority to Obama on May 22nd. I'm going to come back to that. But first, let me update you on the current status. The move for fast-track has now moved to the House of Representatives, where it appears actually that, and we can hope, that it's actually going to have an even harder time than it did in the Senate. And in fact, that ride may have also just gotten a little bumpier. See, one of the issues involved in this whole thing is the idea of retraining American workers who wind up out of work because of trade deals. Now, how that's supposed to happen when this is supposed to be the best possible trade deal you ever heard of for workers and everybody else, how that's supposed to happen, I'm not sure, but, at least they're thinking about that part. Well, a bill currently in the House of Representatives would cut $700 million from Medicare to fund an extension of the Trade Adjustment Assistance, or TAA. This program aids workers who lose their jobs because of trade deals. Now, labor unions and a number of seniors groups have condemned this idea. They've actually urged the members of the House to vote against any extension of TAA if it is not funded independently. Now, considering how these groups, especially labor unions, would normally support trade adjustment assistance, and the fact they're coming out against it now shows just how much more controversial this whole deal has become since Medicare got dragged into the mix. And in fact, since the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, already faces substantial opposition from both sides of the aisle in the House, well, again, we can hope that it will actually result in bringing it down. Now, the supporters of Fast Track are trying to derail the opposition by separating the funding of the TAA from the bill for Fast Track Authority, voting on the Fast Track Authority first and the TAA funding only after as a separate bill. It remains to be seen how effective that will be as a tactic. Now, the thing is that many progressive politicians, many progressive activists, many progressive people say that, the TPP is a bad deal. In fact, it will widen income inequality. It will jeopardize protections for workers, consumers, and the environment. In fact, an economist named Peter Morici, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Morici or Morrissey, said, and I'm quoting him, U.S. multinationals would still profit from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They will be able to more easily move production to Asia to advantage labor and other resources made cheaper by manipulated currencies. Rich shareholders would profit and smile, but ordinary working Americans would face more unfairly advantaged foreign competition, unemployment, and more downward pressure on wages. The thing is, Barack Obama has called the TPP the most progressive trade deal in U.S. history, which admittedly could possibly be true considering how incredibly low a barrier that would be to get over. You have to realize these people are not on your side. All right, finally, we come to the outrage of the week. And this involves the trade deal in the Senate, because an interesting bit of political jujitsu occurred, which resulted in that the final bill included an amendment that would bar any country engaging in human trafficking from getting the benefits of the trade deal. Now, again, the thing is that once the deal is made under Fast Track, you can't make any changes. But in granting the authority, you can say it's got to include this. And that's what the Senate did here. Human Rights Watch declared that, quote, it's simply incomprehensible why anyone would be against this amendment, which certainly seems a reasonable enough sentiment. So you know who's against it? The Obama administration is against it. Why? Because Malaysia is one of the 12 nations involved in negotiating the deal, and it would affect Malaysia. Our own State Department considers Malaysia to be one of the worst offenders, home to some of the worst abuses in human trafficking, with a government that has no plans to improve its behavior. This amendment would keep Malaysia out of the deal, which Obama claims is a deal breaker on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the Obama gang is so intent on scoring this deal for the transnational corporations and the trade bankers who would be the primary beneficiaries of it, that it is fully prepared, even in effect, to argue for allowing Malaysia to continue active involvement in the international slave trade. How can they justify this? Well, the fact is they can't. They can't. They claim that being in the pact is the only way to encourage Malaysia to improve its labor standards. In other words, only if we're nice enough to them, they'll get better. The fact is, we have heard this crap before. We've heard it over and over and over again. In the case of South Africa and the opposition to apartheid, it was called constructive engagement. Exactly the same idea. If we're nice to them, it'll work out. It was wrong then, it is wrong now. In fact, the State Department has actually downgraded 3 countries, Panama, Colombia, and Morocco, on this issue since they had trade agreements with the United States. But the Obama gang and their supporters in Congress want to ignore all that in order to please the CEOs, the transnational corporations, and the banks. These people, I'll say it again, they are not on your side, and don't you ever forget it. That's it for this week. We're done. We're out of here. We will see you next week. Have the best week you possibly can. Peace.